Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Conversations with CSG. Today we're joined by Trevor Sparks. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're approaching your 30-year anniversary in the industry, quite an impressive tenure. What would you say are the most significant developments and changes you've seen throughout your time in this space?
Well, I think primarily it's the change of pace and speed. When I started, you go from being the youngest person in the room to the oldest. You don't really get a warning. When I started in the very early 90s, we didn't have email. We didn't have computers on our desks. A PC was something in my first workplace that you needed to book. So it was very much fax, letters, drafting letters, taking them down the corridor to be typed and then sent, and then a reply might come in 2 weeks' time. So I think that's in terms of the basic mechanics of your working day, that's the change that I think I noticed more. My first day, I was given a Hewlett-Packard calculator and a mechanical pencil. But I think the other thing is there have been changes in the way we deal with each other, probably because of that sort of digital intimacy. We're so close. We're now just a Teams message or a WhatsApp message away from interacting with people, rather than those 2 weeks in each direction that I was talking about earlier. And that's led to, I believe, a fairly profound change in the way we deal with people. And I think that's overall a very healthy thing.
Yeah, do we miss dealing with people on a face-to-face basis? I know I work with people where, they want people in the office, that mentorship. Are we losing some of that, do you think?
Absolutely. Yes. That was one of the things I noticed. I suppose immediately post lockdowns, I was working in an organization where there was a lot of empty desk space. And I was an everyday in the office person. And I would say probably the only person of senior years, if not profile, to be doing that. And I did feel for the younger folks who were coming in. They, in many cases, didn't really have a choice. If you're living in a house share in North London and the only desk space is a kitchen table that's got 4 other people competing for it, you've got no choice. You need to come in. And it's that over-the-shoulder interaction, oh, what are you up to? And how does that look? Can I help you out there? That level of interaction definitely took a hit. And I noticed that slow re-emergence. There are still organizations that don't, I believe, have enough face-to-face time. But then to go back to that idea of face-to-face time, working with colleagues in the industry, it used to be once a year at a conference you would bump into quite close, whereas now a quick Teams call invite, you can be effectively face-to-face with somebody in Australia, as I will be, or actually in the US, in this case today, I'll be speaking to a team of people primarily based in Denver. That would not have been a thing in the past, but it's still not the same. As you've said, it's not the same as being in the same workspace, having folks come in and offer that advice when you see you a bit tied up. But now you've asked this question, it's opened up a whole host of memories of mine, of some of the people I've worked with over the years, the help I've received, and the help that is sometimes a little bit harder to give nowadays.
Yeah. I guess that leads us on for, talking about the digital transformation and sustainability. I mean, it's not just interacting with people. I guess the digitalization has improved lots of things or changed lots of things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was working with people. One of the people that's just come into my mind who helped me enormously over the years, who's sadly no longer with us as of quite recently. He did his PhD with a computer. He was working computer simulation. It was paper tape. It was punch cards that he was using. He still had a calculator with punch cards that you could draw through to put your programs onto that device. And now you have, with a $300 laptop, you have all of that power that you could possibly need, all of the data inputs and sources that you could ever need. Digital twinning. I mean, you asked the question about biggest trends. I mean, the idea now that a comprehensive and integrated digital twin of a mining facility can almost follow from early stage exploration. Once you have a good idea of what mineralogy you have, grade, you can then begin to design the mineral processing operation right through to tailings, and even create digital reproductions of those facilities, and then scroll through time to see how your tailings facility will be behaving, apply scenarios such as rainfall. And that's not science fiction. I think a fully integrated, comprehensive model isn't, I've not seen one yet, but we are moments away from it potentially. And that's a very exciting development.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I guess you've worked, across a number of countries and regions. How have you adapted to those new regions and environments throughout your career?
A combination of spectacularly well and spectacularly badly, without question. I suppose that the countries in which I've lived permanently, Finland, Ireland, and Germany. And of course, I was born and raised in the UK, and I'm now back living in the UK. So from the sort of geographical fringes, if you like, to the heart of Europe in Germany, spent a lot of I would call them extended trips rather than periods of residency in places such as India, Thailand, Japan, the US, North America. I've experienced culture shock in one of those moves, quite profoundly, actually. So how have I adapted? Yeah, well and badly. When it went well, I mean, I can highlight my time in Finland, where
I was going to say,
I think I just had a natural affinity for whatever reason. I believe being a bit more remote back then as well. So, and a group of incredible people that I was working with who were both very, very funny, very, very serious, and just got things done. And I think the level of commitment I saw really was inspiring when I was there. And then in terms of international travel, I think you really have to try not to leave too big footprints when you're there. And later on in my time as an international traveler, I suppose, I just enjoy pausing and looking and soaking in rather than necessarily talking too much. And I think another highlight for me, which I can mention, two countries in particular, Japan, which at the time I was traveling there was at quite so in the let's say early 2000s, late 90s, Japan was at something of a crossroads with its economy and all of having been that extraordinary success story. I mean, I was in Japan when Sony was still producing. Sony had refined the manufacture of VCR recorders second to none. They could produce them in extraordinary quantities at extraordinarily low cost. Nobody really understood that nobody in the world was buying video cassette players anymore. And that was a sort of a symbol of, I suppose, what went on in Japan. Weekends in Tokyo in the very early thousands were really, really something else. An incredibly peaceful place, actually. Yeah. And I think to the hustle and bustle of India, a place I haven't visited now for 20 years, actually. But again, and I've seen the footage, I've seen what Mumbai has become and Bangalore, etc. But really, the sheer hustle and bustle in India was always something to comprehend.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list. India and Japan, two places I need to go. Yeah,
go to Japan first. Yeah. Well, I'm basing this on 20-year-old intelligence, but Japan. I mean, I was at the time I was living in Finland, and what struck me was, and I don't quote me on the precise nature of all of this, but in the religion, the equivalent, I suppose, of a christening, as a child is brought into the fold or whatever. Part of that was to leave a barrel of what I presume was sake outside a temple. And so you would go around Japan in Tokyo and there would be barrels of alcohol against the wall outside the temple, and they could stay there for presumably many years. Once again, not wishing to disparage the Finns, but that wouldn't have been a very successful model in Finland, certainly in the time I was there, to be leaving barrels of Koskenkorva, which was the sort of the spirit that was widely enjoyed there. That wouldn't have happened. So, yeah, you'll see contrasts and silly things. Leaving Finland when it was minus 34 degrees and arriving in Bangkok when it was plus 34 degrees. 64-degree shift in temperature, but a comparative shift in the way you behave, the way you speak to people and relate. I suppose encourage anybody to learn and to experience as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, I bet. And obviously working in all those different places and experiencing those different cultures for you in a career and a leadership style, because you've had leadership positions in various different places across the world.
Yes, and I suppose again there it's something of a mixed bag. I think I'm at the stage of my career now, which we may move on to later, where I'm actually approaching my 10th. What's the pre-anniversary, I suppose you would call it. So I have my retirement date in the calendar, and this laptop, or maybe the one after this, will be firmly closed on that date. And it's just over 10 years away now. And I suppose more recently, I've come to realize that I'm not really at my best, I suppose, in a conventional team position in that. But I improvised and have worked and indeed led some very successful teams in the past. What lessons have I learned? Well, primarily respect everybody, first of all, and recognize that the most extraordinary things can come from maybe the most ignored people within your team. And I perhaps won't go into too much detail, but I've had conversations where, oh, we don't want him. Could you just put him in your team? Take the cost, and then you have that first conversation. Then you realize, oh, hold on a minute, this person has something within them that you can really bring to the fore. And I've got two people in my head right now that's happened with, where in one case it was actually a little 2-week project suddenly achieved what people further up the food chain in the corporation had failed to do for many years. Just some, simple, pragmatic, and a basic ability was really brought out. So I think primarily learn that everybody deserves respect. Learn to speak international English is very important. I'm trying to do it now. I'm trying not to slip into too much UK vernacular, but speak with a pace. Check that you're understood, and check that your common purpose and your mission is well understood as well. Constantly referring back to that. Yeah. So, simple example, I've been in positions with equipment manufacturers. Now, clearly our job is to shift as many kilograms of steel in the form of machinery as you possibly can. So yes, keep that as your primary focus. That's ultimately what we're judged upon, because unfortunately there are such things as financial quarters and margins and revenue, etc. But then with that simple flag, or that sort of, I suppose, summit, that target that you have, it's then very simple to break that down into, well, what's my purpose today? What am I looking to do? And where's our focus need to be as a team? Who can help out so-and-so? When a team member has a stroke, which has happened to me and is out of action for some time, who can step in? And then what do we do next time when that happens? What do we need to build within the team to ensure that we're more robust? And I've seen styles of leadership where it's all very friendly and pally, and I suppose I've been able to simulate that a little bit. Not that I'm an unfriendly person, but you're working with the people you're working with. You have a common purpose. Their lives, their families' lives, their kids' education, the ability to buy sports kit if they're playing ice hockey, all of that, which incidentally is a fabulously or a ridiculously rather expensive sport. If you want to go and play football, you just need a pair of plimsolls and a rolled up jumper. You try that in Canada, where you've got to go and drop the equivalent of a small car on the sports kit for your child who wants to become a goalkeeper, and then they grow, and you have to go out and do it again. So I think greatest lessons I've learned, or greatest single lesson, I think it has to come back that everybody in your team deserves respect. That they deserve to be there. If they don't deserve to be there, then you do have to take that harsh decision and find them something better. And that's another point. The people who have left teams I've been in, or perhaps sometimes against their will, or left companies I was working for, generally they've ended up in a better place. In some cases, they're slightly lost in the position they're in, and then they find something often very quickly afterwards that absolutely is where they should be.
It's so important. I know from my side, and how difficult it is to find these people with these skills specific to tailings, whether it be in the processing side or the geotechnical engineering or the hydrogeology. So have these people, if they're not in exactly the right fit, it's important that you try and retain them and find the right position for them, or the right team, or the right place to be in. It's super.
Absolutely.
And
I think that coming back to that sort of shortage that you've mentioned, and it has been quantified. There is an excellent paper that I had on my old hard disk, my last corporate hard disk, if you like, and I don't have a copy anymore. But a group of folks, I think Joe Scalia might have been one, but anyway, pause. So in this paper they took, first of all, they started with the number of known tailings storage facilities, and then they worked out how many engineers that you need, engineers of record, and worked down the sort of organizational structure. And they were able to quantify the global requirement. You probably know this paper, or if not, you may be Googling it straight after this. And it was very easy to come up with the numbers. So there is they put a number in their paper and said, this is how many geotechnical engineers we need. And then they went on to say, and this is how many graduates we're producing per year. Go figure. And the disparity was quite alarming. So yes, not every person in every team needs to be a superstar. That's, I suppose, not the points I was making. Everybody needs to be making a contribution, but some are going to make their contribution in a quieter, more considered, sometimes more reliable way, without the flashes of brilliance and the barnstorming presentation to a client. Diversity in the sense, and we will go on to talk about diversity and its meaning, but it doesn't mean what often comes to mind when you talk about diversity. It can just be the difference between diversity of people who are a bit quieter and a bit more showy, a bit more considered, a bit more brilliant in flashes, and that type of consideration can be pretty important. I mean, I'm actually quite enjoying having a bit of a chance to think about maybe the last 30 years. So I appreciate the fact that I'm able to sort of think, and I'm now, some of the faces and names from sort of 20 years ago that I was working with are coming in, and they weren't showy or flash, but they got on and did some great things. And I can trace back some, as we will perhaps describe in more detail later. I'm from very much upstream of tailings storage facilities. That's where my technical expertise lies. But there are things happening in the world now that I'm aware of that are making a marked difference in tailings management, which come from ideas that people in my team had. One or two that I had. I'll claim those as well. But and they're not necessarily recognised or known, nor perhaps ever will be. But certain ways in which dewatering plants operate can come straight back to people I know and have worked with, and in some cases led. So thanks for the chance to remember one or two of those folks.
Let's talk about the diversity and inclusion. Like you said, it's not just, I guess, what we typically expect D&I to mean or look like. I mean, we've had conversations with many people across the industry, the barriers and challenges we're still facing, not just in mining, in tailings, but what changes need to be made to processes, equipment, clothing. I know has been a big conversation piece, which, only in the last few years has been PPE equipment to fit men and women and whoever.
It's mad, isn't it? Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. People who, mines without women or changing rooms for women or even accommodation, I've heard fewer recently, but they still crop up. The simple one, PPE equipment, overalls that fit, boots that fit, women having to wear, or in some cases men with smaller feet, but statistically more likely to be women with smaller feet having to wear 3 pairs of socks just to get the smallest boots that are available to fit somewhat comfortably. And I'd go slightly further. One of the, perhaps a little bit outside of the realm directly of tailings, but something I have been involved in the past, was just the idea that if there's a control panel or a valve or something that needs to be done on an operation, why is it designed for somebody who's 5'10" tall, or 1.80 m for folks who think in those terms? Seeing control panels where even I'm at that typical European standard male height, but even I have to get on tiptoe to touch a button on a control panel. Well, how was somebody who is just slightly below the norm, be they male or female, going to be able to do that? Step ladders in control rooms, and I think that I think there's been some great changes. Some organizations in the mining sector have made great strides, I suppose, in this. I do also recognize that in some cases it's a lot of website friendly photographs of people who aren't 5'10" men operating equipment. I do recognize there is an element of that going on, but at the same time there are clearly visible steps forward, I suppose.
Okay.
I've always lived in a female-dominated environment. So back in the day when I was playing rugby, I remember once turning up for the first match of the season, and only at that point did I remember that my girls had painted my toenails on holiday. So there's a bit of a
similar
changing room maneuver.
Delivery driver during COVID. Luckily for me, I was barefooted when he took the photo of the parcel, and I then realised. Mm-hmm. And luckily for me, he said, "Don't worry, mine are the same."
Yes. So it turns out to be a podcast about painted toenails. That's quite turn up for the books there. I've grown up in a very female house. A male cat sitting on the printer next to me is partly the exception. And I'm therefore also aware of challenges more generally. I am so sorry for not remembering the name of the book. It has been, my wife read that book a couple of years back, and my children have. It's the one where they point out that everything is still today designed for men with a certain voice. Even voice recognition software, it's trained on men. Crash test dummies. Maybe by now there's a female equivalent of a crash test dummy, but certainly until very recently, every crash simulation had a 5'10" male simulated dummy in there. And there are cases of people who aren't that size, shape, or gender who've suffered perhaps unnecessarily as a result. What else do we have in terms of what changes made to process equipment? I think it's continuing to recognizing it and calling it out. And there are some very strong ambassadors out there. Women in Mining in this country, that's an organization that is working to just point out the obvious sometimes.
And growing globally as well. It's,
Yes.
place I'm seeing it expanding across the world.
Yeah, I've very proudly got a Women in Mining sticker on my bike frame. And of course, I mean, the obvious point that will follow is that you're not doing that because you're kind-hearted or a woolly liberal. You're doing it because anybody out there, regardless of size, shape, gender, whatever, are capable of doing great things for your organization. So if you've got somebody who has the potential to become a great process engineer or a great plant controller or even a great maintenance fitter, why do you have to impose the extra barrier?
Well, I think it's certainly in tailings and water and geotechnical engineering, there are some fantastic, very vocal female role models out there for people to look up to and work towards and see what they can achieve. Certainly, for me, I spend a lot of the time in that tailing space, obviously. Yeah, there's some names that everybody knows, which is brilliant for the industry.
Yeah, and I've been to a couple of panels where those names were on the same panel actually once. Yeah. Actually, some of the stories there were quite harrowing as well.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. One of the very strong female leaders that you mentioned actually did name and shame on that panel at one organization that she had been working in where it just wasn't right. There was something wasn't working as it should have been and moved on. And yeah, I think it's a topic that far more attention needs to be paid to, but at the same time, I can observe it and see it. I'm not sure I'm in a position maybe I'd like to do a great deal about it, except just continue to talk about it.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on. So across the globe, we know the challenges that we're facing across mining and tailings and water especially. What do you believe are the greatest challenges within tailings, and what are some of the greatest opportunities?
I mean, we do need to sort of quickly go to what's underpinning all of this. And I'm going to focus for a moment on climate change. I do profoundly believe it's the greatest challenge we face as a species in the long term. So without solving our man-made or anthropomorphic, as I've been told, climate change, we really are going to be causing massive poverty, hunger, and ultimately huge suffering on the planet. There is an answer. It's very well known, and it's electrification and the use of renewable sources of power. And yet the market as a whole is stuttering. So there's lots of talk about copper and nickel, and yet it's just not responding. The example I would go back to and do refer to from time to time, but there are two enormous challenges that were faced. Now, the response by the US, for example, where there are pretty good statistics, before 1939, the US had only ever produced about 3,000 military aircraft. And by 1944, they had produced 300,000. So 100-fold increase in the production of fighters and bombers. And, on the side, they also managed to produce 128 aircraft carriers just alongside that, and were producing warships and things which were on an unimaginable scale in 1938. If you had looked at the world. And I do think that a similar response is needed. And I'm not in a position to influence that directly, of course. I'm not the president of a large Western country, for example. But there needs to be a response which I think reflects the severity of the challenge we face, which then ultimately we are getting to tailings, of course.
Yeah.
So we need a lot more copper to take one example of a mineral, than we currently have. At the same time, we have diminishing grade. In other words, every ton of copper we produce is going to produce ever more tons of tailings, unless we perhaps change our processing methods somewhat. So there we go. That, the first challenge is that there is this overwhelming surge of tailings coming towards us. The oft mentioned doubling of metal production in the next couple of decades. So in the next couple of decades, kind will produce as much refined metal as throughout history to this point, which is an extraordinary uplift. Now, we're not on track to achieve that, and part of that is in failure of projects to come on stream, failure of projects to maintain their capacity. And I'm not going to advocate for ignoring local communities, nature, for example, and ignoring their concerns, but we need a lot more copper. So we need to find ways of managing that development of those resources in such a way as A, it's on a vastly greater scale, but B, minimizes absolutely the amount of localized harm that it causes. There's this twin challenge of producing vastly more copper, to take that one example, but to do it on a far less impactful way when you consider it from somebody living downstream in the valley of where these mines are operating. So greatest challenges within tailings, first of all, recognizing that we are in a massive deficit in terms of production, recognizing that there's vastly more mineral processing coming, and that we simply don't have the volume of people and the methods and the processes needed to be able to handle those, or that mine waste, handle those tailings as well as we need to. So that's, I suppose, some of the greatest challenges, is finding positions for the right people with the right organizations such that they can thrive and begin to chip away at the problem. And challenges in terms of knowledge, experience, knowledge transfer. We started off at the very beginning of this talking about the fact that younger folks now in their early 20s, they don't have as big a chance of having the guy whose name was above the nameplate on the door coming by and asking how they're doing, and then sitting down and saying, hey, why don't we tackle this little problem together? Are you aware of this piece of software, or have you tried doing that? So we have both an overwhelming amount of mine waste coming. We don't have enough people today to handle it. We don't have the way of developing, despite the valiant efforts, by the way. There are some wonderful organizations and great people, and both commercially and in the educational sphere, working like Billy-O to fill that deficit, but it's still a major gap. In terms of opportunities, the obvious ones, it's often been talked about the ability to use tailings as the feedstock for another process, refine them. Vale are producing sand for construction and aggregate purposes from tailings. That's an opportunity that can be maximized and ought to be maximized. Reprocessing of tailings is something that once again has been talked about. There are real examples of success stories. I don't think it's an automatic given, and far from it, that every tailings pile was poorly processed initially and is therefore full of gold or whatever else somebody might be seeking, but there are opportunities to be explored there. And I think the other great opportunity is to consider tailings and water as a whole, and to really focus in on the opportunities that there are for water recovery and how that can make the overall process more successful. And finally, I believe there are opportunities in terms of landform. You can construct wonderful landforms. Tailings architecture is a phrase I've heard once or twice over the last couple of years, but who knows what could be constructed? Because something we haven't really mentioned, but tailings facilities are the biggest man-made structures in history. We've never built structures that big. They are proverbial visible from space.
Yeah.
And they are, by definition, vast quantities of potential building material and construction material. So they can be used to, in my idealized state, is that one day a mine will shut down their mill in the morning, and the local TV cameras will be there, and perhaps a few of the big brass will fly in, and they'll flick the switch and the mill will be turned off. And then during the afternoon, the last remaining ore will be processed. And then in the evening, just as sun sets over this wonderful landform that's been built progressively over the mine's life. The big brass shovel the last little bucket or so of tailings into the last little hole, and they put a bit of turf on top, and then they can stand back and look at what's being created. Slightly science fictional opportunity, but it can be.
Incredible closure projects I've seen in some of the consultancies. Some incredible closure projects. Obviously, they're a long time in the planning and it's not an instant thing. But yeah, some beautiful scenery, the trees coming back, the environment really being looked at, the water being put back in place. And, I guess coming back to climate change and global warming, doing everything that we possibly can, if it's possible.
Yes, I'd say we have an enormous challenge ahead of us, and we need perhaps some of that thinking that leads us to, we've got to focus on this, and at the same time, there is an opportunity, and I don't want to trivialize it and make it a golf course opportunity or something, but there are, as you said, tree plantations, vegetation, lakes. It's all possible, but does require obviously a radical shift in the way we're processing some of the minerals and more thorough extraction, etc. But those opportunities do exist.
Yeah,
absolutely.
From the start of the project, these new projects give us the perfect opportunity to consider that. Whereas 50, 100, whatever years ago, we weren't even thinking about that. But now with these newer projects,
yes,
it's something we can look at
at
the very beginning.
I mean, build it as this digital twin that we spoke about earlier. From exploration, project it out. What could we do with the landform? What's happening to the water in this area? Can we leave something behind which is, well, it's not for us to say that's better. If you're indigenous communities living near mine sites, it's very easy for us to say, yes, they're going to be impacted by climate change and we can come and fix it for them. And that's the wrong way of thinking. But equally, can we leave something behind which in 30, 40 years' time is sustainable, better, doesn't need to have constant monitoring, doesn't have the sort of spectre of a dam collapse hanging over everybody for the next indefinite period. So I think there are opportunities, and we're trying to do our little bit within those opportunities at Kipinat Limited, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about that. I think we've covered a lot of the reasons why, but what really led you to build the Kipinat model?
Well, it's related to some of the things we've talked about. I'm primarily involved. My day job is through participation in studies, conceptual scoping study work, and consulting to mining companies, engineering companies, etc. One of the trends that somewhat seen as an opportunity is in tailings is towards dewatering of tailings. So that's absolutely the technical focus of what I'm doing with Kipinat Limited. To have a brief segue here, the name Kipinat actually is Sparks in Finnish, approximately.
I've had plenty of people ask, and now I know.
Yes. There is an alumina facility in British Columbia called Kipinat, and a number of people have asked me if it's related, and it isn't. So it's close to the word sparks in Finnish. It's not precisely, because you can't have the sort of A with two dots and very easily in a URL and I didn't want to go Spinal Tap and have umlauts on my logo. But most Anglophones will pronounce it Kipinat, which is pretty close to the Finnish pronunciation.
You mentioned Spinal Tap. I know we launched the app on the launch of Spinal Tap as well, didn't we?
That was my target day. We missed it by a couple of days, but I wanted to make reference to, this app goes to 11 and all that sort of stuff. And we've now lost the vast majority of people. Well, I say vast majority, the dozens or so, whoever may be listening to this, maybe one or two have got that reference. But it does tie back to what we were saying about the knowledge gap, the skill gap, the experience gap. One of the things I found most rewarding in my career has been sitting and talking to younger engineers and discussing the technical challenge they're facing. And I simply can't do that as much anymore. I also don't want to travel as much as I have done. I'm very happy to be based in one place rather more and to become a lot more local in my sort of day-to-day life. So Kipinat Limited, as I said, predominantly we're paying the bills with participation in studies and reviews, but we've also developed the TailingsPlant.app. Simply TailingsPlant.app is the web URL, which is in no way a full substitute for having a wiser, older, greyer head asking how you're doing and whether they can offer any help, but it fulfills something of the same purpose. It's an application which anybody can use. It's free in the sense of $0, £0, €0, but also free in the sense that we're not also harvesting your personal data and selling it on to an interested party. By looking at usage patterns, we can get a feel for some of the trends that are taking place in the industry, but we can't zoom in and know what an individual user is up to. The application itself is really there to help demystify the whole concept of tailings dewatering. One of the large opportunities in tailings is dewatering of tailings through mechanical means to recover more water, to produce tailings more suitable as a construction material for potential landscaping or safer impoundment. And the application simply takes whatever information the user has and enables them to make sense, to dig deeper, to look through resources and articles, as well as perform calculations and use those tools to ultimately produce a downloadable report that they can put in the project file, use to share ideas and show this is what happens to our water balance, for example. So if we were to achieve these things in our dewatering process, then we would recover this much water. Our filter cake, or if you like, our building construction material for our TSF, will have these volumes of solids and liquids, etc. So it's been a very rewarding experience developing it. I participated a little bit in the coding even, although I have a great deal of professional help to make sure actually that it works, for example, in Spanish and Portuguese. So if you cover South America and English language engineers, then you've largely covered, well, let's say 80+% of the world's tailings, I would say, particularly when you consider Brazil with Portuguese. So, you know, it's also in that sense not exclusive. Anybody in the world with a grasp of those three languages and other languages could be added. The application is there. It helps to demystify what tailings filtration is all about, helps you understand some of the potential rewards and understand the scale of what you're looking at. How big a facility do you need to build? But it also, importantly, I think, offers users the opportunity to ask a vital question, which is, with whom should I speak to next? Where do I go for more information, more conversations? And so we are funding and have funded the development of the application through sponsorship. So I'm extremely grateful for CSG Talent. I'm very grateful to acknowledge the support of CSG Talent. We're hoping that this will provide those people out there in the world Googling in Spanish or Portuguese or English, Googling tailings dewatering, tailings plant design, tailings filtration, tailings management, that they may come across this resource. We are certainly pushing it out very actively, starting with the top 20 mining companies, offering lunch and learn sessions, and really pushing it as hard as we can to ensure that people can come across it and find it. And then when they're there, they may be looking for a new position. They may be wanting to explore in more detail, and I would hope that they would go to the sponsors page and see the link to CSG Talent and click on it, crucially.
Absolutely. Where can people find it? We have said that we'd like to do a follow-up session and show it working live and just give more insight to people. But how do people get hold of it? In what situation would they be using it?
Okay, simply go to, all one word, TailingsPlant.app. So there's no hyphenation, no punctuation in there. Simply TailingsPlant.app. We are working on having a slightly snappier route to get to it. Once you're there, everything will be self-explanatory. Hopefully, there's a good level of. There is an operator manual, actually inspired by my Hewlett-Packard calculator manual.
Oh.
From 34 years ago. That's something which, it's out there. We want to do our part to help address some of the challenges and unleash some of the opportunities that tailings offers to the mineral processing industry, and ultimately play our part in the delivery of these minerals, and particularly metals like copper, nickel, as well as some lesser known but equally vital elements.
This is a question we ask all of our guests. What's the greatest bit of advice you've been given throughout your career?
So what's the most valuable piece of advice I've ever received throughout my career? Actually, it was somebody, and by the way, I'm going to tell a few folks that I've done this, and some of the people I've worked with over the years might want to listen in, and they'll know who I'm talking about now. Somebody who offered many pieces of good advice over the years, but the one I'd like to really highlight is one with a slightly serious message behind it, but it's simply, if you're out, look at your watch. Actually, a supplementary piece of advice I would give everybody: get a watch. Put your Apple, your iWatch, whatever, in a cupboard, but get yourself a watch that tells the time. So the advice is, if you're out, look at your watch. If it's after midnight, go to bed. It's very simple, and it's advice which has a multifaceted and deep set of consequences behind it. I think that's a very good piece of advice, actually. It also implies that you should enjoy yourself, but you should also find your limit and know when something is enough. Think about tomorrow, perhaps not something I gave enough consideration to for a period of time. So yeah, if you're out, look at your watch. If it's after midnight, go to bed.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks so much, Trevor, for joining me. I look forward to getting together again, and we'll really dig into the Tailings Plant app. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. Speak again soon. Bye-bye.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.